Do I ever get called out for emergency visits? Well, yes, I do, and this is one of those cases. This cow has got something wrong with that left front foot. It took the farmer 30 minutes to get her in from the pasture last night. So let's get this cow in the chute, pick that foot up, and try to figure out what the problem is. Welcome back to Nate the Hoof Guy. Looking at it from the front, nothing really jumps out at me, but after I pick it up, well, it's pretty obvious. At least to me it is. So how do I spot the problems on these hooves? Well, I look at the top first in the white line. I look down toward the toe triangle on either side. And I also check that typical sole ulcer site. That's where the majority of those problems are going to be. That white line looks good there, but there, I think that's going to be the problem. If we move over to the other side, we got the sole ulcer site looks good. The white line on the other side, that looks good as well. I'd say, yeah, definitely it's going to be over here. Okay, but how did you eliminate that other claw? How were you sure it wasn't over there? Well, I couldn't have been 100% sure, but the vast majority of problems that we find, especially white line issues, are going to be on the medial claw, or that inside claw of the front feet, and it's going to be on the lateral claw, or the outside claw of the back feet. That's where the pressure that is applied to these claws, the majority of the pressures are applied on those two claws. And since these are pressure-related problems, it stands to reason that that's where we would find the problems. Once again, the majority of the problems are going to be there. Not always, but I'm going to focus on that medial claw first. If anything jumps out there, that's, of course, where I'm going to attack. Now that we've gotten this claw cleaned up and can get a better look, yes, this is almost certainly going to be where the issue is. Now, how do I know that this is an internal pressure type problem and not something that happened exterior, or something that poked through this sole? See that little bit of redness in there? That's the dead giveaway. That redness, that's happening on the inside of the claw. That's caused by some hemorrhaging that was deposited in that hoof horn when that hoof horn was grown months ago. So as that hoof horn is deposited, as that corium produces that new layer of hoof horn, if there's a problem going on at that corium level, we're going to see that in that hoof horn that's been produced. Now, over time, once that gets exposed to the outdoors, that is when it becomes problematic. You can see that little red dot there. That is actually where the lesion's going to be. But as that hoof grows out, that's where that bottom mark is. You'll see that it's kind of following its way up that foot, and eventually they're going to come together to right where that lesion is underneath. And there we have hit pay dirt, or pay juice as it were. Now this is another clear sign that this is a pressure-related problem and not a puncture. Had it been a puncture, we would have expected that area or that lesion to be directly under that first black mark we found. However, it didn't. It ended up way up this claw, and that's because, like I said, as this mark had grown out over time, that's what made it lower on the hoof. Here you can see that pocket of infection. That's the area we got to clean out. And it doesn't take long, actually, for a little guest to show up. Now, while we may think this is not some delicious stuff, this fly, well, he would argue otherwise. This time of year, they're aggressive. They have a last few months of life left, so whenever they get the chance, they're feeding on whatever they can.
What would make it go so bad so fast?
That was the farmer trying to figure out how a cow who was perfectly fine one day could almost not make it back in from the pasture the very next day. And the reason that is because of the pressure that builds up inside there. Even though this flaw was there for months, and even though it wasn't causing any problems for those months, once that corium became exposed to the outdoors, to the slurry and the mud and stuff, that was able to get inside there. The infection started to build, that pressure started to build, and then it became unbearable for her to walk on. That's what happens with these. Even though once we get this opened up, you're going to say, man, how could we have not seen this sooner? It's because they don't show it sooner. A lot of times you won't know anything is there until they start to show that lameness, and that's when we find these things. It may be hard to believe for owners that may not have hoofed animals, but if you've had a horse, if you've had a goat, if you've had a cow, and they get lame, you know that this is the case. One day they're perfectly fine, the next day they can't hardly walk, and you're convinced that there must be something stuck in there. Something has changed immediately, overnight, for this to happen. And in reality, the only thing that has changed is that it takes time for that bacteria to get in there and cause the problem. That's what's happened here. The bacteria got in, that corium became inflamed, pressure started to build, and she no longer wanted to walk on it. And now the task is clear. We got to remove any of the remaining loose hoof horn, and we got to thin the margins all the way around this lesion. That's just going to make that hoof more pliable and reduce any chances of pinching in and around that area. Then we're going to thoroughly clean that, and we're going to let her out and see if we've changed the way she's walked. As we move in here, you can see how discolored that corium is on the right-hand side there. That's where that salicylic acid is really going to come into play. It's going to help slough away or exfoliate that particular area. The corium on the left, that's healthy. The corium on the right, we need to get that all cleaned up so it can start to produce hoof horn again. I'll bet you when we come back and look at this as a recheck, we're going to have good hoof growth on that left-hand side, but we may still have some work to do on the right-hand side, just because that corium is going to be delayed in producing new hoof horn. It needs to first become healthy before it can do its job, and clearly we're not there yet. Just got to touch up these edges, and then we'll get that salicylic acid wrap in place. Now you'll notice, as we put this foot down, and when we first let her out of the chute, she is not too sure what to do. She knows that if she puts that foot down, it was going to hurt. So she's very gingerly taking those first few steps. But as she starts to go, she realizes, hey, this feels much better. By the time she gets past the truck, she's strolling along quite nicely. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and we will see you all on the next one.